In this lesson, we're going to be covering the fundamental commonly used data types that you will be using in most of your scripts to perform your calculations and analysis. The first data type you're going to be working with in all of your scripts, for the most part, will be number types. So there are two types of numbers in PineScript. We have integer type. This is whole numbers. So for example, 1 would be an integer. This could be 1, 10, 100, 20, whatever. Just as long as it's a whole number and there is no decimal in it, that will be called an integer. Next up, we have float type. This is like an integer, except it has a decimal place after it. So any number with a decimal place is considered a float. The reason this is called a float type is because there is no fixed number of digits before and after the decimal place. So the decimal place can float around, and so that's why they call it a float. Programming can be weird like that. Don't ask me why that became a thing, but you'll get used to it. So there's a lot of technical jargon you'll need to learn in coding. Integers just mean whole numbers. There is more nuance to this. For example, there is a maximum number that an integer can be, but you don't need to know about that because it's extremely unlikely you're going to run into that issue in PineScript. I certainly never have in the 3+ years I've been working on all kinds of scripts. But anyway, moving on, we have our floating point numbers, float type numbers. For example, a closing price is a float because there's a decimal number in it. You can see here on Bitcoin, we have 2 digits after the decimal place. That means that this price here is a floating point data type. Next up, we have, it's not another data type, it's just a different way of using floating points. So float type E, we'll call this. And if I were to say 0.1 and then use the mathematical operator E and then put 2 on the end here, what this is saying is return the number or the result of this equation, which is 0.1 times 10 to the power of 2. Now, it's not often you'll need to use this, if ever, but the option is there if you need to, or if you're mathematically inclined. For me personally, I'm terrible at math, which is interesting considering I became a trader and programmer. But that's the beauty of modern programming. You don't need to be good at math to be a programmer. But if you are talented at math, this is a tool at your disposal. The next data type we have to work with is what's called Boolean values. So a Boolean data type is simply yes or no, true or false, 1 or 0. In PineScript, it's represented by the word true and the word false. So a bool type or Boolean type would look something like this. True for true, false for false. So let me leave that as true. This is quite simple to understand. You'll use this data type quite a lot in your scripts. In fact, these first 3 data types will make up the majority of your scripts in terms of how you calculate stuff. The next data type we have that will be commonly used is color types. So color types in PineScript are their own data type. And to reference color data types, you can use the inbuilt data types that PineScript provide. If I type out color and then a full stop and hit Control space or Command space on a Mac, and I scroll down, you can see a list of inbuilt colors here. So if I say color.red, that will give the PineScript inbuilt red color as a data type. And this can be passed into any of my drawing tools. So for example, we've got a plot here that is plotting our float type E. If I change this to say color equals color type, whoops, and I save the script, our line will turn red. So you can see there. So that's what color data types are like. You can also use hexadecimal colors. So if I wanted to color this red in hexadecimal, that would look like FF0000. If I save that, we get bright red. We'll cover hexadecimal colors in a future lesson. You don't need to know them in order to use colors in your script. But if you are familiar with hexadecimals from web development, primarily these are used in web development. So if you're familiar with working on websites, you'll know how hexadecimal colors work, or you can use a hexadecimal color picker. Just look up hex color picker on Google. And this can be an easy way to fill out custom colors in your scripts. One other option we have to work with in PineScript is the color.rgb function. This we can pass in 3 values, or 4 values actually: red, green, blue, and transparency. So for example, if I wanted full red, I could type in 255, 0 green, 0 blue, and 0 transparency. Now the transparency is optional. If I just put in RGB as 25500 and save the script, this will stay red. Actually, let's change this color so that we can actually see the difference. So this will now be bright green. There we go, because we've set green to full. So RGB colors range from 0 to 255, 0 being none and 255 being the maximum. And if we wanted to change the transparency, let's say we wanted to make the line completely transparent, we could set transparency to 100%, save the script, and now the line will disappear from our chart, but it's still plotting up here. So that's one way of plotting values onto your chart without the user seeing the actual line being drawn. I use this quite a lot in my scripts to draw information onto the chart that I want to reference in my indicator values, but that I don't want to see on the actual chart, such as stop loss sizes and things like that. Don't worry if this was a bit confusing. We'll cover color types in future lessons in great detail and in more practical examples. The next data type we have to work with that you will commonly use in your scripts, not all scripts, but some scripts, will be the string data type. So this will be string type equals text. So string is just what programmers call text. And in order to define it, we need to put 2 quotation marks on either side of our text. The reason why we do that is if we just say text here, then PineScript doesn't know the difference between this and an actual function or variable in our script. If I save the script, we'll get an error here. It'll say undeclared identifier text. If we put quotation marks around it and save the script, we'll get no error because now PineScript knows that this is text. Now you can use quotation marks or you can use single quotation marks as well. That will work just the same. If I save the script, this is treated exactly the same as if we'd used quotation marks. So it's really just a matter of preference, which one you use. I prefer to use the double quotes personally, just because I'm used to that from other programming languages. But if you're experienced in a different language and you're used to using single quotes, you can use them in your scripts if you want to. And just as a side note while we're here, if you want to include a single quote in your text, you can't just add another single quote, because now that's treating this as a string, and then we just have a single quote on its own. If I save the script, we'll get an error because we didn't close off this string here. If we add a backslash in front of this text, PineScript will now know that we want to include this quote within our string. Then this backslash is telling PineScript we want to include this single quote within our text. So for example, let's change this to ITS bullish. Now, if we were to draw this onto our chart using a label or any other text drawing function, a table or something like that, this text would display on our chart as this. So this quotation would be included in the text and the backslash would be removed. So that's the purpose of the backslash. You can also do things like \n, and that would move bullish onto a new line. And so if we were to draw this onto our chart, it would look like this. It's bullish on a new line. There are several escape characters you can use in your strings. We won't cover that in today's lesson because it's outside the scope of this lesson. I'm just introducing you to these concepts. I don't want to overwhelm you with too much information. And so let's just get rid of all this and go back to text. And we'll cover escape characters and stuff like that in future lessons. So before we wrap up this lesson, let's plot all of these types to our chart. And we'll just have a quick look at what they look like. So we have integer type, float type E, and bool type. We can't plot a boolean directly onto our chart, so we can only plot these numbers at the moment directly onto our chart. So let me change this to color.white, and I'll change this to color.white as well, and we'll save the script. So now you can see that we're plotting our integer type as 20. It's just a whole number. And then our float type, let me change my float type to 33.3 and save the script. Now here's our float type, 33.30. Now remember, in a previous lesson, I talked about precision of your script. Because we have 2 decimal places after our market price, we have 2 decimal places on our indicator values. So even though I set this number to 33.3, it displays as 33.30. If I didn't want that, I could change my precision to 1, save the script, and now it's only plotting to 1 decimal place. And so here we're plotting our integer number as a whole number, our float number, and then our float type E number. And in our integer plot, we are passing in our color type. Now let's use our bool type here. Let's say if bool type is true, then let's overwrite our color type to color.red. So now when I save the script, this color here, this plot will turn to red because bool type is set to true. And we just said if bool type is true, override color type with the color red. And to override something, we need to use the colon equals symbol. We can't just use equals because that's declaring a new variable. We want to overwrite this variable with this new one. And don't worry, we'll cover this in future lessons. I'm just showing this to you before we wrap this lesson up, how bool types work. So now if I save the script, this color will turn red because bool type is true and we've overwritten our color with red. If I change this to false, the color will go back to green because bool type is no longer true. Save the script. There we go. So that's it for this lesson. There are several data types here that we'll work with. These are the common data types. There are other data types too, like tables, labels, drawing objects, things like that. But we'll cover those in future lessons once you become more familiar with the basics of PineScript. So don't worry if you are overwhelmed by any of this lesson. Throughout the course, we will be using all of these data types quite regularly in practical scenarios, and over time you'll learn how they all work and how you can use them in your own scripts. So that'll do it for this lesson. I hope you're enjoying the course so far, and if you are, stick around because it's about to get a lot more interesting.